Hello everyone and welcome back to Bitwig Studio and Music Production. This is lesson 3.46, and in just a minute we're going to talk about the tool device, which is perhaps one of the most important devices that you're going to have inside all of Bitwig Studio, and I'll talk about why exactly that is in just a minute. But first I wanted to reiterate a point that I don't think I made 100% clear in the last video, and that's about subtlety. And so the reason we're really putting amplitude off until the end is because it's the easiest effect to hear. So if we were to come in and start with the amplitude effects and I put the tremolo on, I said, okay, you can hear it gets louder and it gets quieter. You really take it for granted. You don't have to actively listen that closely. And even if I tell you, really try to listen, really try to hear what's going on, you would just be like, whatever, I can hear that there's a change in level. I can hear that there's a change in volume. When we've worked with these time and duration effects and with these frequency effects, if you're new to music production or if you've even been doing this for a while, I've always tried to stress that you really have to listen closely. You have to listen to the subtleties and you have to listen to those nuances. And so if it was your first time ever working with a distortion device and you had the mix down to 0 and you're slowly bringing it in, and initially you're not hearing a change, and then suddenly it gets to 10% and you're suddenly like, wait a minute, I'm starting to hear something. What is that? And then you bring it back down to 0. And then the next time you go up and you start hearing something at 9%, it takes a long time to learn how to actively listen and to try to fully grasp just what's going on. First of all, understanding it orally so you can hear it, and then also to conceptualize it. And that's what I'm trying to do for you here with these videos, is try to explain why it's happening. But then, of course, you have to sit there, you have to practice, and you have to do your best to train your ears to actually hear the differences. With amplitude effects, it's a lot easier, but hopefully now you've started to learn how to actively listen, and I hope that now as we go into these amplitude effects, you'll have the tools, you'll have the practice necessary to approach these in the same way that you've been approaching all of the other effects, and that's to really listen closely, to listen for the subtlety, to listen to the nuance, and especially when we get to compression and our dynamics controls, that's the hardest thing for new people to start to hear, to actually hear what's happening when I compress. Like, what is really going on here? It takes a long time to learn how to do that, and hopefully by putting this off to the end, you fare a better shot of actually hearing it as compared to if we were to do this at the very start. So, rant over. All right, so we're now here in Bitwig Studio, and we're ready to talk about the tool device. As I just mentioned, one of the most powerful devices in all of Bitwig Studio, because this is what you have to go to keep levels consistent, to keep things under control, to tame things. And a lot of people really are scared of using the utility devices or the tool devices that come bundled with their software. For some reason, there's this urban legend that if you have too many of these on a track, you're actually degrading the quality of the audio. In the digital domain with a 32-bit depth floating point working space, you're really not going to be doing anything. This isn't analog. There's not a whole lot of just ground noise that we need to be careful about. The digital domain is very clean, it's very pristine, and for that reason we have a little bit more flexibility and can put in all of these tool devices, and they're not going to color the sound. They're really there for your control, and they're there to be used as a tool, and you always have to use tools. There are certain decorations and stuff you're going to want to hang up in your house, but to build that you needed tools. To build the frames you need tools. To then actually hang the picture on the wall you need tools. And that sounds crazy, but that is exactly how important the tool device is going to be for you. So first things first, let's review signal flow. And inside of Bitwig Studio, we start the signal flow from the source, so from the audio file itself. In my last creation project I was using samples from Nicole Scherzinger's Your Love, and that was like a fully mastered track. So they were pushing it as hard as possible to make it as loud as possible, and I brought it in, and when I played it in Bitwig and I put my fader to 0, I was in the red. And the only way I could prevent being in the red from the source, from the sample itself, was to turn it down. So how do you turn down your samples? If I put a tool device in here, and I play my drum loop, I want you guys to notice something. Take a look at this indicator here. This is indicating our original loudness level of our audio loop, our drum loop in this case. If I turn the amplitude down here, I can turn it down really low, but notice this first fader is still indicating that our signal is coming in a lot hotter. And you need to be cognizant of this and wary of it in case you bring a signal in that is super loud and that you need to tame from the start. The way to tame it is to go into the signal itself, and you can either take the gain control and pull it down, or as you see here, we have our inspector panel open, and I can go to the gain section and turn it either down or up. So just as kind of a radical example here, if I want to really crank things, I could crank this up to 18. And now as I'm playing back, let's just turn the amplitude down in advance. You can see that we're going way over here at the source. And even though you're not hearing any digital distortion, it is there. And if we were to export this out, you would probably be able to hear it. So even if I tame it with my first tool device, and even if I try to tame it on the way out, it doesn't matter. So when you bring samples in, always be aware of that. Always be kind of careful. I'll bring this back down to its original. Double click it, press 0. And now we've got our sample, and I think we're good to go. It looks like we've got plenty of headroom there. We're cool. So from that initial signal level from our audio file, we then will go into our processing. So as you see, I've brought a tool device in here, and let's quickly talk about some of the parameters on here. Our first two are for phase, and we have the ability to flip the phase, and we can either flip it on the entire signal or flip it independently if we're working with a stereo signal. So this drum loop, let's double click, we can see that this is stereo. We have two channels. We have a left channel up here, and we have a right channel down here. These might be completely identical, and if that's the case, no worries. However, we now have the ability to do something kind of unique and kind of interesting. Very rarely are you going to do this, but what we could do is just flip the phase on one side. And what that's going to do is take this left side here, and it's going to set this peak to become a trough, and this trough to become a peak. So let's listen to what that sounds like, and then I'll actually show it to you so you can see it as well as hear it. And what if we pull the right side out? So when we flip the phase on just one channel, it starts to lose a lot of body. It doesn't sound as full. We're starting to get some kind of weird phase cancellations happening there. But let's see what it looks like. To do this, you're actually going to have to go to the arranger view here, and let's make sure we have everything set up. Flip the phase on the one side. Let's go ahead and bounce this. Post fader will work. Now if I open this up, let's increase the gain so we can really see it. If I zoom in, boom. You can see it's done exactly like what I've said it was going to do. So that's one creative usage of the tool device, and sometimes I've actually used that in the past on some things, on some kind of crazy signals that have come in totally, like with the digital VST synthesizer plugins. Sometimes I've thrown a device on and flipped the phase on just one channel. It can do some cool things to some detuned lead sounds, just FYI. The one reason you might actually use this in a more utilitarian way is if you're recording like a drum set, for example, and you have a mic on the top of a snare and on the bottom of the snare, just based on how those are positioned. And if you think about a little bit with how sound waves are going to travel, those mics are going to be out of phase, in which case you could take either the top or bottom mic, depending on what's going to sound better, and you can flip both sides. Okay, you also might have to do this if a cable was like wired incorrectly in a studio, which can happen all the time. If you solder your own cables, which a lot of people do, it's very easy to put them out of phase, but no fear, you can always just turn this phase button here. And really the only way to then decide what side you like better is to just listen to both. And we'll do this with the snare. My apologies, guys. Okay. So here's it with the phase flipped. And here it is originally. Listen closely. So you're going to be able to hear a subtle difference there, nothing major in that case, but sometimes it will make a huge difference. We can try it on the drum loop and see what happens. Really listen to the bottom end. So again, not a huge difference, but just experiment with that. And especially if you're recording anything live straight in, always make a habit of putting a tool device on right away and flipping the phase and kind of just listening closely and hearing if you can actually prefer one side to another. In this case, I really couldn't, so I'd probably just leave it as is. All right, up next we have our pan. Our pan is as straightforward as you'd think. It actually will occur pre this pan on our fader. So we can pull the pan to the left, right, to the left here, and then if we start pulling it to the right, we're gonna be slowly bringing it back center, just so you guys can hear that real quick. You can see that if I put something 100%, all right, in this serial chain, and then I try to start pulling it back, I'm not going to get anything to happen because I've already committed 100%. As compared to any other number, it's going to not work that way. So just a nuance that you need to be aware of. So even if I go to like 95, I can still push this back. Okay, very important. And the last control is the width control. And this is extremely, extremely important. People never seem to understand this. The width control is only going to have an impact on a sound that is stereo. Okay, so let's listen to our chord real quick. This is definitely a stereo signal. And we can tell because if we actually look really closely, we'll see some slight changes from the left and the right channel. And now if I pull the width out, actually maybe it's not. So look, you can even hear I make mistakes there. It sounds like this is basically like a mono signal. It just seems to be favoring the right a little bit. But what's an easy way that we can make this a little more stereo? Let's just throw a chorus effect on the front here. And let's click the wide button. Trying to find a nice sweet spot. Okay, there we go. So now if I actually push out the width, what this is going to do is it's going to listen for the discrepancies between the left and the right channel, and it's going to push those further out from the center. So I'm going to play this and just listen as I push this width control up. That's it at center. Okay, so as you noticed before, when this was more of a mono signal, and it basically was a mono signal, just that when it was exported, it was slightly panned for whatever reason, I can now pull this back and make this into a mono signal. All right, so I'm going to take the width, pull it down to 0, which is making it mono, and you'll see when our indicators come up here, it's just going to be like a flat bar. All right, so we're now in mono. And the second you put it all the way into mono, if I add another tool device and attempt to push this out stereo, unless other processing has occurred that's added some stereo width to this signal, it's going to have absolutely no effect. But now listen, if I even just put in 2% width, 4% width, and now start to widen it, you'll start to hear that effect. All right, so that's going to be very useful for you, more in a mix type context, because there are times when you're going to want certain things to all be going straight down the middle, and where you're going to want to push some of your other tracks out a little bit wider, free up space in the middle, add some interest to the listener who maybe has some really high quality headphones or a good monitoring system, so they can hear a little bit more action there in the sides. All right, so that pretty much does it for the tool device. Make sure you put this in whenever you start to see red in any one of these places. And if you see red, for example, if our chorus was putting us into the reds here, you need to make sure a tool device is preceding that troublesome effect or whatever it may be that's pushing you into digital overs. Hope that was helpful for you guys. A lot of people are weary to use the tool device for whatever reason, but it's super utilitarian and it can also be very creative. So if I'm playing this back again, let's maybe flip the phase on one of these. Flip it left on the other. Add some width. So just all sorts of stuff you can do. Don't hesitate to experiment, have lots of fun, and use the tool when you need to. Take care.